Hello, everyone. I'm Chuanchuan. Today, we are going to introduce the creating story of Chuanchuan the Lingwulong. Lingualon was an amazing dinosaur, which was currently the only diprosaurid discovered in Asia. The neural spines on the back of diprosaurids were forked into two branches. In the past, it was always believed that there was an absence of diprosaurids in Asia, because members of the Diprosauridae family were found in Europe, South America, North America and Africa, but only not discovered in Asia, just like what happened to ceratopsians. However, the discovery of Lingualon proved the existence of this animal in Asia. Let's first take a look at the physical features of this dinosaur from the head to the tail. First, it looked much like Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, which were its close relatives, but its neck was not as long as that of these two dinosaurs. Its neck was a bit like a Margasaurus or Brachytrachopan in South America, but not as extreme as that of Brachytrachopan. Its neck was more like Diprosauris in Africa, which was slightly shorter. The skull fossils of Lingualon have been discovered, but they are quite broken, so in our restoration, we used the Diplodocus and Apatosaurus as references, which animals had well-preserved skull fossils. It had a relatively long head like this model shows. Its eyes are on the top of its head. Its nostrils are here, between its two eyes. If we look at the fossils, its nostrils should be here, where there is a big opening, but now we generally believe that, when it was alive, its nostrils were in this position. Currently, the clear evidence of a Camarasaurus impression shows that there was cartilage in this position. In reptiles, the cartilage is usually used to fix the nostrils. So this position was the true opening of sauropods' nostrils. The Camarasaurus fossil shows that the bony nostril openings lie above the eyes. A sauropod embryo fossil, to be exact, a titanosaur embryo fossil shows that its bony nostrils also locate on the top of its head. This embryo fossil was well preserved, and shows that, when it was alive, the skin of its nostrils was close to its mouth. Besides, in our restoration, we made a beak-shaped mouth for this dinosaur. Because over these years, it was found that many sauropods might have a beak-like structure. There are several such specimens. What first grabbed people's attention is that many Camarasaurus and Titanosaurs had the fossils of a separate circle of teeth found. There was no skull, only a circle of teeth. In the past, people believed that their teeth were strong, but their skulls were weathered, so only its teeth were preserved. Later, people found that this type of fossil was preserved neither with the skull, nor with other body parts. And the circle of teeth was preserved intact, without getting loose at all. People speculated that this dinosaur might have developed a layer of beaks outside its mouth. Its teeth grew out of beaks, and its mouth was wrapped by beaks, or a hard structure similar to beaks. So those specimens with only teeth are likely to be that part. This shell, with teeth fell off when the animal died and was preserved. There are some other specimens, which are about the study of the eating patterns of Diplodocus, a well-known study of sauropods. In this very early theory, people found that there were many traces of food and plant fiber friction in the slits between the teeth, and also on the tooth surface. That suggests when Diplodocus ate, its teeth formed a rake-shaped or comb-shaped structure to comb tree branches down. If it had lips and gums like the general animals, it couldn't form such a structure, and this would cause great damage to its soft gums. Therefore, its mouth might be specialized into a structure with a hard shell to make it more convenient to get leaves. Another specimen is believed to be the lips of a Camarasaurus. The Camarasaurus skull fossil was found with the teeth part wrapped by a yellow structure. Some scientists believed that the structure was the lip, but later after studying and analyzing, some people believed that it was a keratinous structure, which indicates it was a beak structure or beak-like structure. Nigersaurus, a sauropod from Africa, its mouth was flat, looking like a vacuum cleaner. It had fine teeth, unlike any modern animals that have a lip structure. The way it ate was similar to gnawing, a bit like a Diplodocus gnawing seaweeds in the sea. The rake-shaped teeth of Diplodocus were consistent with the way it ate. and its mouth might be such a beak-like structure. Therefore, when restoring Lingualon, we shaped its mouth into such a structure. Now, let's talk about its body. From its neck to its back, and then to its tail, you can see we made a row of spikes. This was based on a speculation. The first theory proved that there were spikes on Dichrosaurids was from a specimen. At the time, the specimen was believed to be the tail end of a Diplodocus. Of course, now this specimen is believed to be a separated genus, the Diplodocus, instead of Diplodocus. At the end of this tail specimen, a few spikes arranged in rows were preserved. Since then, people realized that there might be such a row of spikes on the back of Diplodocus, like iguanas. But in the early years, many people didn't know the source of restoration, and often mistakenly put the spikes on the back and made the tail end, a whip, without spikes on. But actually the spikes were first found at the tail end, not on the back. As for whether there were spikes on the back, currently, there are only a few fragmented spike fossils, but we don't know which body part they were from. However, over these years, people found many titanosaurs, such as Alamosaurus, had large bony plates on the back, and the upper part of the tail, like those of Stegosaurus or Ankylosaurus. Later, people realized that bony plates, or spike-like structures, might be common among sauropod dinosaurs. Therefore, we made spikes on the back of Lingualon. In terms of the distribution of these spikes, when restoring Lingualon, we made two rows from its neck, which gradually extended to its spine, and merged into one row. During the restoration, at least the front half part of its body followed a rule, because the skin of the front half part of its body was close to its neural spines. The rule we followed is to make one spike correspond to one neural spine, just like many other dinosaurs possessed. For the first half Lingualon's body, from the neck of the pelvis, its neural spines were forked into two rows, so we made each neural spine correspond to a structure like the bony plates of Stegosaurus. Viewed from the front, its neural spines were forked, so at the two apexes, there was one for each. At its pelvis, as its sacral vertebrae were not separated, but a plate-like structure, they extended downward from here. They were simply skin derivatives directly going down in rows like this and extending to the end of its tail. That is the rule the first half of its body followed. Another theory we relied on is from a Margasaurus. A Margasaurus was also a diprosaurid, which had long neural spines at the back of its neck. Some scholars believed that the end of neural spines might extend like spikes, form a weapon or decoration, and the upper part might be wrapped by keratins. To a Margasaurus, one neural spine corresponded to one spike. Supposing this structure of a Margasaurus was homologous with the spikes of Lingualon, we adopted the design of paired spikes on its body. Of course, over these years, some people believed that a Margasaurus had no spikes, and its long neural spines were simply wrapped by skin. Certainly, that is another theory. Besides, its forelimbs were the ones of typical sauropod dinosaurs. Its hind limbs were longer than its forelimbs. If you take a look at the early restorations, you'll find that the buttocks were the highest and that the shoulders were in a low position. That's because, in the early years, people often put the shoulder blades down, causing the front half part of its body to be relatively short. Early restorations were all like that. But now we know the shoulder blades in the front half part of sauropods were erect, in a shape like this. This side should connect to the muscles on its neck, and the front half of its back, so its shoulder blades and its neck generally form an almost 90-degree angle. Therefore, its shoulder blades were erect, as if the front half part of its body was erect. Now we generally believe that the shoulders of sauropod dinosaurs were as tall as their buttocks. Next, let's look at its trunk. From the fossil, you can find that its neural spines are tall. The neural spines of the Dichrosaurids were tall. Actually, when they were alive, we can make this posture, a bit like Ultraman, to show the structure. This stands for its ribs and this stands for its neural spine, just like this. If viewed from the front, its skeletal structure might be like this. When alive, a lot of muscles were connected to the two sides of its neural spines. Especially, sauropods had a heavy head and tail, so the muscles of this part were very strong. Therefore, when looking at the model, you'll find that the overall is round, unlike the back sail structure of Spinosaurus. Then, let's look at its hands and feet. When restoring the hands and feet of Lingualon, we based on what most sauropods possessed. Its hands didn't have any nails, and looked as if it was wearing a boxing glove, with 5 fingers wrapped inside. To be accurate, 4 fingers were wrapped inside. A long nail on its thumb stretched out. Although it had 5 toes on its hind limb, there were only 3 claws, because the other 2 degenerated and disappeared, wrapped inside by skin. There were many scales on the sole of its feet. In the past, we believed that the sole of sauropods or other dinosaurs might be flat, without scale structures. But in recent years, with the research on dinosaurs' footprints, people found that most dinosaurs had scales under their feet. Lingualon was certainly no exception. Moreover, its scales were sharp and thick. In Europe, fossils of a brachiosaurid were discovered, and spike-shaped scales were even found under its feet. So there were certainly some scales under the feet of Lingualon. Now, let's take a look at its tail. The base of its tail was thick, and it became thinner toward the end. The tail of dicrosaurids was always described as a whip, because people believed that it functioned as a whip. In fact, it was more powerful than a whip, because the spike on the dorsal side of its tail made it form a rotating saw. I wonder whether you have been whipped by the tail of iguanas. Once the tail with spikes of iguanas whips your body, there will be a cut. Perhaps, like iguanas, this dinosaur made its tail work as a saw. Let's take a quick look at the structure of its tail. First, there were 2 sets of muscles on the dorsal side of its tail, and the upper set was narrow. These narrow muscles, extending from its neck, were made up of the longissimus and other muscles. The other set was relatively broad, muscles extending from the end of its pelvis and ilium. The upper muscles were mainly responsible for raising its tail from touching the ground, and the broad ones on the left and right sides were for swinging its tail. Lastly, let's take a look at the scales on Lingualon. Because no skin fossil of Lingualon has been discovered, and at least current reports say nothing about that, so when making the scales, we used Diplodocus as a reference. Many exquisite skin impressions of Diplodocus have been found in recent years, so we know the skin structure of Diplodocus. Diplodocus had very big scales, some of which were even several centimeters big, far bigger than that of most dinosaurs. The known scales of many sauropods discovered in the past were small, but those on Diplodocus, at least on some body parts, were bigger. Especially on its shoulders, people found a lot of armor-like scales, which were strip-shaped with ridges in the middle. So in our restoration, we mainly borrowed the idea from such a structure. Only the fossils of its shoulders were preserved, so we don't know whether the scales on other parts were like this. So we only made this type of scale on its shoulders. Scales were found on the other body parts of Diplodocus, but they were relatively ordinary. Perhaps they were densely distributed on its shoulder blades. But such armor gradually scattered on the other body parts, forming structures away from each other. Besides, there were band-shaped scales on the abdomen of Diplodocus, resembling those of crocodiles, so we did the same when restoring Lingualon. So far, it seems that the abdomens of most dinosaurs were found to have similar structures. It's just that their size varied. Good, the above are the introductions of Chuanchuan the Lingwulong. Thank you all.